Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast for intermediate to advanced level English learners. Podcasts are an excellent tool to help improve your English language ability. But are you using them correctly? Let's learn how to make the most of Thinking in English and other podcasts on today's episode. Head over to the Thinking in English blog for a full transcript of today's episode for free. Take a look at my Instagram page, Thinking in English Podcast, for more content. And leave a like, a review, or a rating wherever you are listening today. You are all listening to my podcast right now. And thank you for listening. It's amazing people listen to me. I assume that almost everyone listening has a reason. You either want to improve your English or maintain your English level, but do you actually know how to use podcasts to achieve your goals? Really, I should have made this episode a long time ago, but for some reason it completely slipped my mind. All of you obviously listen to podcasts with the hope of improving your language skills and English ability. But are you using podcasts correctly? Are you making the most of Thinking in English? By the end of this podcast, you will know how to make the most of podcasts and improve your English. Let's just briefly start off with a quick discussion on why you should use podcasts to study English. Podcasts are a relatively new thing, but have been massively popular over the past decade. There are now over 3 million podcasts on Spotify, and probably more if you include platforms like Apple, Amazon, and Google. With so many podcasts existing online, there are so many options for English learners. I always recommend my students to listen to a mix or a variety of different podcasts. Of course, Thinking in English should be the first one you listen to, but also throw in some other podcasts. There are lots of podcasts designed for English learners, but you should also try podcasts for native speakers as well. I actually have a bonus Thinking in English episode over on my Patreon recommending my personal favorite podcasts. Podcasts are an amazing resource, and you can listen to them anywhere in the car, at home, at work, or while walking the dog. The only thing I would caution you about is choosing the right podcast. I mentioned that there are 3 million podcasts on Spotify. That means that there are so many great podcasts. But there are also a lot of terrible podcasts and a lot of very average podcasts. This is true for all types of podcasts, but especially ones for English learners. You should check the ratings to see how popular a podcast is and listen to a few episodes to check the quality of the show. Why are podcasts good for English learners? Well, there are 3 clear reasons. Listening to podcasts can help you improve your listening comprehension, your ability to use and understand the natural flow of English, and often helps your pronunciation. Listening to native English regularly, trying to understand nuanced and complicated topics, and being exposed to interesting sentences are all amazing things for English learners. In addition, depending on how you study and listen to podcasts, you can also work on your reading skills at the same time. I release a free transcript with every episode, so you can practice reading as well. But more on this later. We'll talk more about reading later. I know a lot of podcasts for English learners want you to pay for their transcripts, but if you can access them, it does really help your learning. I've been advised by some of my friends to charge for my transcripts, but I won't do it because I know how valuable transcripts are to language learners. And a lot of the biggest, most popular, and well respected podcasts actually produce transcripts for free anyway. My ambition is to be in that group of elite podcasts, and I don't want to charge my listeners for something that's so essential, like a transcript. So, I've established why podcasts are good for English learning, but how can you make the most of them? I'm going to give you tips on different methods you can use to improve your English through podcasts. And before I do this, I should probably give credit here to Leonardo English. I'll leave a link in the description and on the blog as well. I've tagged him. Um, I thought of quite a few of these tips myself, and then I found his excellent article, and I might have borrowed a few of his ideas too. Actually, you might be hearing from him on this podcast at some point in the future. So I'm sure Leonardo English doesn't mind me borrowing some of their tips. Just before I give you the tips, I think it's important to briefly go over the difference between active and passive learning. I released an episode on this topic a few months ago, and I think it is one of my most popular episodes ever. I still get messages about it today. So go and listen to that episode for a full discussion on active learning. But in a nutshell, active learning is the idea that you need to be focusing completely on studying. You can't learn from putting an English TV show on while you're scrolling through your phone. It's difficult to learn passively. Most English learners tend to be passive learners, and most podcast listeners are definitely passive listeners. You are probably listening to me, but are you actively engaging in what I'm saying? Are you dedicating 100% of your effort to understanding and retaining the information I'm giving you? To make the most of podcasts and to make the most of thinking in English, you should be actively listening. How can you do this? Well, here are some tips on how to use podcasts effectively. Transcripts. The first tips surround transcripts. As I said earlier, many podcasts release transcripts. Major podcasts, which are funded by big organizations, tend to have free transcripts, usually because there are disabled listeners who might need to read while they're listening or instead of listening. And also, some smaller podcasts, like Thinking in English, also release free transcripts. The first tip is don't use the transcript, at least the first time you listen. The main purpose of a podcast is to improve your listening skills, and reading the transcript at the same time as you listen is kind of cheating. So, the first time you listen to a new Thinking in English episode, try to do it without a transcript. Put 100% of your focus and attention on my voice, listening to what I'm saying, and comprehending my English. And try to listen actively. Also, keep a notepad and a pen with you while you listen. This way, if I say an interesting word or a phrase that you don't understand, you can make a note and check the meaning later. And I know some of you actually take notes of my content as a great way of practicing for note taking in English university lectures or business meetings, which is a great skill to develop. Once you've listened to the podcast at least once, then feel free to check out the transcript. Use it to confirm any details or words you may have missed while listening. Practice reading it out aloud while listening to copy my pronunciation, which is called shadowing, and it can help you understand the content. Most of my episodes are on quite complicated topics, So you can use the transcripts to correctly improve your English and understand what I'm saying. If you are unsure how to shadow a podcast, the Leonardo English article I mentioned recommends listening to the podcast a few times to get a good understanding of the topic. Then listen while reading the transcript. And finally, listen while repeating the words out loud with no delay. Basically, read the text out loud at the same speed as I speak. Keep doing it until you are confident. It's one of the best ways to improve your pronunciation, intonation, and achieve a more natural flow to your English speech. Dedicate time. The next tip is quite a simple one. Dedicate time to listening to podcasts. If you want to actively listen and learn from thinking in English, consider it part of your schedule. I have started to schedule my day, and it makes it so much easier to find time to study. My approach used to be I'll study Japanese after I finished work. But as many of you know, there is always more work to do. Now, I schedule myself to study at a certain time. For example, 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. Now, when it gets to 8 p.m. on Tuesday, I have a set time to study, and I find it much easier to do. Do the same for thinking in English. I release episodes twice a week on Mondays and Wednesdays. Well, actually, I release episodes 3 times a week on Fridays as well, but they're just for my Patreon subscribers. So maybe you can schedule two 30-minute periods or 40-minute periods a week to dedicate yourself to listening. It's fine to listen on the train or in your car or while walking the dog, but to make the most of your listening experience, find somewhere where you can give your full effort and not be distracted. I like the idea of combining passive and active learning here. Listen once while you're on the train or you're driving to work. And if you think it's a really good episode, listen again another time. But this time, do it actively, making notes and giving 100% of your effort to comprehending the content. Writing. It might sound a little strange, but you can practice writing in connection to listening to podcasts. I'll give you 3 different ways to do this. First, practice note taking. Note taking is a really undervalued skill in the modern world. As a graduate student in London, many of my classmates really struggled to take notes of our lectures. We would be taking courses on complicated issues. The voting system South Korea employs during local elections, Japan's security arrangements with Southeast Asian countries, or the influence of ancient philosophical concepts on modern Chinese foreign policy. These are all real lectures I attended. And professors will speak fast, with very advanced vocabulary, and will often jump quickly between different ideas. And the same is true for some business meetings. So, learning how to take notes is a vital skill. You need to listen, comprehend the interesting or important issues, and quickly note them down. Everyone has a different technique for note taking, but the important part is to practice. So, while you're listening to Thinking in English, take some notes. Second, why not transcribe the entire podcast? If note taking is not enough for you, you could try to write a transcript as you are listening. It's not an easy thing to do, but if you can dedicate yourself to this task, it will really help to improve your comprehension and listening skills. And you don't need to transcribe the whole podcast either. Why not just choose a 5-minute section and give it a go? Third, write podcast summaries. I think I mentioned this tip in my episode on active learning a few months ago, And it's something I often tell people who message me. Write summaries after you watch a TV show or listen to a podcast. It's a great way to test your comprehension and practice writing at the same time. What should you include in your summary? Well, what were the key arguments? What did you think about the topic? Did you agree with everything I said? Don't just quote things that I say, try paraphrasing or rephrasing. This ensures that you understand the key points being made in the episode, and it lets you try out some of the new vocabulary. Use the settings to your advantage. Next, use the settings for your advantage. Podcasts are a type of technology, and you should make use of the technology. What do I mean? Well, one thing you can do is change the playback speed. I speak quite clearly on the episodes because I want as many people as possible to listen. If you want to challenge yourself, increase the speed. Try 1.25 times or 1.5 times speed and see if you can understand. You probably can. Another thing you can do is download the episodes. If you download the episode rather than streaming it, you can listen anywhere and listen offline. You can turn off the internet, stop any distractions, and dedicate yourself to listening and learning. Podcast communities. And the final tip is to use the podcast communities. Podcasts have fans. Hopefully, all of you consider yourselves fans of Thinking in English. But how can you use these fans, this community? Well, commenting on posts and sending messages on Instagram are all potential methods. I pretty much answer every message I get on Instagram unless you send me a voice note. If you send me a lot of voice notes, I probably will forget to answer, as I usually reply to messages while on the train and can't listen to your voices. But if you send me a typed message, I will reply usually within a few hours. But the best way for Thinking in English anyway is to join my Patreon. You can join the conversation club that we have running twice a week. You can ask questions on the Discord server. And in the future, we might launch book clubs and other exclusive opportunities. So here is today's final thought. Hopefully, after listening to this episode, you have a better idea on how to use podcasts to improve your English. First, make sure you are an active learner. Dedicate yourself to listening and learning, and then you will notice your improvements. Try making notes, writing your own transcripts, shadowing, summarizing, changing the speed, or downloading episodes. And let me know if you notice a difference. How do you use podcasts to study? Are you going to change the way you listen to Thinking in English after today? Let us know in the comments on Spotify, the comments on the Thinking in English blog, or send me a message on Instagram. Follow me on Instagram as well, right? Thinking in English podcast, and I put lots of extra content over there. And as I mentioned, I always reply to people who send me messages. Leave a like, a review, a rating wherever you are listening right now, trying to become the highest rated English learning podcast. We're almost at 2,000 ratings, which is absolutely insane. Head over to the blog, thinkinginenglish.blog, where I put every single transcript. As I mentioned, I have no plans to make people pay for my transcripts. There's already over 200 episode transcripts on the Thinking in English blog, and there'll probably be another 200 more before I end up stopping this podcast, I guess. So yeah, go over to Thinking in English for the full transcript. And it helps you make the most of the podcast, right? So shadowing, transcribing, checking, confirming. You can do it with the transcripts. And if you love listening to me and you want to help support me and keep the podcast going, go and subscribe to my Patreon account, patreon.com/thinking in English, or the link is in the description of the podcast. You got conversation clubs, one-on-one classes with myself, bonus episodes, and other things that we'll start launching in the future. But if you don't want to join, that's fine. Just leave me a rating on Spotify, write a review on Apple, and recommend my podcast to one of your friends. That's more than enough. So have a great everyone. Hope everyone has a great evening, and I'll see you. Well, I'll speak to you next time.